There's been a lot of buzz around Grand Seiko lately. The brand has really caught the fancy of watch collectors because of their design and craft, and there's also been an increase in mindshare because of the sheer number of models they've released. Now, this can also sometimes come in the way of really understanding what the brand is all about. So whether you're just trying to learn more about Grand Seiko or thinking about whether you want to invest in the brand, we've packed in everything you need to know. Hi, this is Amish, and we're going to talk about 10 things you probably didn't know about Grand Seiko, so that beyond the gorgeous styles and mesmerizing finishing, you can really see what the brand stands for. Until 2010, Grand Seiko was only sold in Japan. No one really knew what they were, except the most insider of insiders. You wouldn't see them in magazines, at auctions, or anywhere else really. But then it went in the direction of Japanese whiskey, going global in a really big way. The big turning point came in 2017 when Grand Seiko became an independent brand as opposed to the Seiko sub-brand it was earlier. And just in this short period of time, they've made some serious waves on the strength of nothing but their craftsmanship, quality, and finish. Handmade is a word that we hear a lot of in the world of watches. It conjures images of watchmakers at their bench, making watches with their own hands. When I visited Grand Seiko's Shinshu Watch Studio in Japan, I saw this to actually be the case. It's unbelievable how human each part of the watchmaking process is. The cases are Zaratsu polished by hand. The diamond edge cutting machine for the indexes and hands is operated by hand. The final indexes are applied to the dial by hand, and the blued hands are done individually and manually by a master craftsman. The movements, of course, are hand assembled, including the Quartz 9F movements. We've clearly not gone into every little detail here, but the key takeaway is that the watchmaking process at Grand Seiko is very human. Everything is accuracy first at Grand Seiko. And this goes back to their founding principles in 1960, where they were trying to push the boundaries of both beauty and accuracy. They were competing at the Swiss observatory trials, winning many prizes, and around the same time, Seiko also introduced the world's first quartz wristwatch. Today, Grand Seiko's quartz watches are rated to 10 seconds per year. The spring drive is rated to 15 seconds per month, and their traditional mechanical movements are tested to standards stricter than the Swiss chronometer. At Grand Seiko, the practice of watchmaking without the pursuit of accuracy is completely futile. Coming to watchmaking innovation, Grand Seiko introduced a new high beat movement in 2020 called the 9S-A5. The big news with the 9S-A5 was that it came with a brand new escapement technology, the dual impulse escapement. The escapement is a key part of the movement which regulates timekeeping, and unless it's a coaxial from Omega, chances are that almost every mechanical watch uses the lever escapement. The lever escapement is tried and tested and has been in use for centuries, but it does have some issues around energy and friction which Grand Seiko tried to overcome. With the dual impulse escapement, Grand Seiko have come up with what is basically a once-in-a-century kind of watchmaking innovation, and watches that have this movement are essentially a piece of horological history. Grand Seiko didn't really have to do this, but they did it anyway. Now the word Zaratsu goes around a lot at the mere mention of Grand Seiko. Put simply, Zaratsu polishing is the use of a lapping machine to polish cases, where the front of the rotating wheel is used to polish rather than the side. This imparts the case a smooth, distortion-free mirror finish that has come to be a Grand Seiko signature. A craftsperson who does the Zaratsu polishing has to train for no less than 5 years before working on cases that will be sold to customers. And Zaratsu polish is only done on the cases, not on the hands or indexes as some people believe. Zaratsu also has nothing to do with Japan. Zaratsu is simply the Japanese pronunciation of the Swiss-German supplier of these machines. These machines were used to create the sharp angular cases such as the 44GS and the 62GS, and have today become a Grand Seiko signature. You know how sometimes at a quick glance you just know it's a Grand Seiko? This consistency in design comes from a codified set of principles called the grammar of design, which is today simply known as the Grand Seiko style. This was developed in the 1960s by designer Taro Tanaka, and the intent here was to create eye-catching, attractive watches which would give the Swiss a solid fight. The grammar of design actually lists 9 precise principles or elements that should be followed for most Grand Seiko watches. This includes signatures like highly polished bezels, faceted hands, and rectangular hour markers. The grammar of design was first used to create the 44GS watch in 1967, which has gone on to become a Grand Seiko classic. The grammar of design is used by Grand Seiko even today, and what's most interesting to me is the fact that each Grand Seiko watch sets out to achieve a very particular visual purpose. Given Grand Seiko's focus on accuracy and the fact that Seiko made the world's first quartz wristwatch, it comes as no surprise that Grand Seiko even today devote themselves significantly to quartz timekeeping. Basically, if you look at a 9F, you'd be hard-pressed to believe that it's actually a quartz movement. This is because Grand Seiko grow their own quartz crystal, they hand-assemble these movements, and they have actual mechanical parts and jewels in them. They're also rated to 10 seconds per year, compared to a normal quartz movement which is about 15 seconds a month. This is basically as good as quartz movements get. Also consider that the watches these movements go into are handcrafted and finished in the same manner as any other Grand Seiko watch. In fact, the watchmakers who make the spring drive and 9F watches sit in the same Takumi room at the Shinshu Watch Studio in Japan. Now, quartz watches get labeled a lot of things, but in case of a Grand Seiko quartz watch, you're getting a high-end handmade watch with genuine horological merit. The spring drive was in the works at Grand Seiko for over 20 years before coming out as an unrivaled timekeeping technology that blended the best of both quartz and mechanical watches. The spring drive is best known for its smooth gliding seconds hand, but it's also important to know that this is a technology that basically nobody else in the world has been able to industrialize and scale like Grand Seiko. Piaget introduced a hybrid watch in 2015, but that felt like an experiment more than something that they wanted to do meaningfully over the long term. If you're unfamiliar with the spring drive, it's basically a watch which runs mechanically, it doesn't need a battery, but the regulation of timekeeping is done using a quartz crystal to ensure better accuracy. If you collectively look at what Grand Seiko does with their 9F quartz and spring drive movements, it shows a complete absence of any kind of arrogance about the purity of mechanical timekeeping. Grand Seiko believe that if a watch is capable of being beautiful, accurate, and lasting, it should be made. This represents a kind of forward-thinking dedication that the world of watches can really benefit from. Grand Seiko also has something called the Micro Artist Studio. This is a collective of Japan's finest, most decorated, experienced and skilled watchmakers. And the goal here is to really test the limits of what a handmade watch can be. The Micro Artist Studio have been responsible for creating masterpieces like the Credor Eichi, as well as the Credor Sonnery, which is the most complicated watch to come out of the Seiko house. The Eichi, which is a collector's favorite, has a hand-painted porcelain dial and a movement which is finished to a phenomenally high standard. The Micro Artist Studio was mentored on finishing techniques by none other than living legend Philippe Dufour. The fact that Grand Seiko chooses to have a unit like the Micro Artist Studio says a lot about how much they revere craft and tradition. This probably sounds cliched and cheesy, but the only way to really appreciate a Grand Seiko is to experience it in person. The sense of outright quality and craftsmanship becomes just so obvious. Some of this has to do with the way some elements are designed to play with light, but even otherwise, all the details and finishing are virtually flawless, no matter how much magnification you subject them to. It's truly rare for watches to get even better under a loupe. And I know that this can generally be said about any watch, that its effect is more powerful in person than in pictures. but Grand Seiko truly take it to the next level. There's a really welcome honesty to the kind of watchmaking Grand Seiko practice. And there's a lot to them, some of which may not be so well understood because they've been in the global spotlight for just a couple of years now. What I can say though from experience is that Grand Seiko is the easiest and most value-driven way to getting a truly handmade high-end watch, no matter which movement or model you may choose. Their meticulousness is phenomenal. Grand Seiko in India have also launched their official e-store recently at grandseikoboutique.in. The e-store has the full collection of classics, new releases, as well as online-only watches and limited editions. So that's it. I hope you've come away with a much better understanding of Grand Seiko after watching this. If there's anything else on your mind about the brand, just drop us a line and I'll surely get back to each one of you. To read a more detailed version of the story, check out windingritual.com. Thanks for spending this time with us. Until the next one. Take care.